So if you've been studying Spanish for a while, at this point you probably can watch a Netflix show with subtitles, or you can understand what your teacher is saying. But then when it's your turn to speak, your brain goes blank and you can't find the words. So this isn't your fault. This is how our brains work, and this happens to everybody. So basically, even though it's more complex than that, as an abstraction, our brain has two kind of separate language processing systems. We have a receptive system and a productive system. The receptive system receives information, and the productive system produces information. When we talk about production, we usually talk about writing and speaking, which is usually the hardest part when we are learning a second language. So just think of it in terms of faces. You can recognize a lot of faces, right? We are really good at recognizing faces. But can you draw a face from memory? Like, can you draw your sister's face if you have a sister, or your father's face, or your significant other's face? It's kind of a different skill. So, in a way, when you are learning Spanish, your brain somehow stores Spanish in a recognition vault, we can call it, but then you also have to build the pathways to what we'll call a production vault. So lacking these pathways is what linguists call the comprehension-production gap. Most people, when they are learning a second language, they have this gap. People always say, like, yeah, understanding is way easier than speaking. Yes, it is. A lot of times we learn vocabulary in a passive way. We learn to recognize the words, and that's great. But then we don't practice using them that much. And a lot of methods, and even more these days, when people are consuming a lot of content, they are very passive. And they are still great, and we should still use them. But these methods are not forcing us to produce speech, to produce Spanish, to speak Spanish under pressure. So if we are consuming a lot of content, that's great, but we should still find ways to get some forced retrieval practice. And we don't necessarily need a teacher for that. We can do that ourselves, but we have to make sure that we do it. We can force ourselves to produce the language, even though it's uncomfortable. And that means practicing our writing, and most importantly, practicing our speaking. And there's one thing here that might seem counterintuitive. Translation exercises can actually be pretty good for practicing our production skills. We get the input in our first language, like let's say that's English for you, and then we are forced to come up with the translation. And we are producing. We have to write the translation, or even better, we have to say the translation. We are not just recognizing stuff. We are actively constructing sentences. We are building those production pathways. But there's one thing, when we are doing translation exercises, we shouldn't be translating in our head. We should be writing it, or we should be saying it out loud. That would be the best approach. Speaking a foreign language requires some motor memory. Like when speaking, we're using our tongue, our mouth, our vocal cords, and we need to practice those physical movements. So while getting lots of input is really good, it's a great idea to emphasize output practice, production practice. We can start with simple sentences, and then, as always, gradually increase complexity. And doing this consistently will, over time, build that bridge between comprehension and production, between reading and listening, and writing and speaking. The more we force our brains to produce Spanish, the better we become at it. The stronger those production pathways become. So, summarizing, understanding Spanish means our brain can recognize patterns. Speaking Spanish means we can create those patterns ourselves. Our brain can create those patterns on demand. Since these two skills are sort of different, they require different practice. So, while consuming content, again, is great, I would try to increase the amount of production practice that we do, because there's usually an imbalance in there. Consuming content is easier, and we don't even have to be with other people. We can practice production, we can practice speaking while we are alone in our car, for example. And if we keep doing this over a long period of time, our speaking skills will become so much better. That's all I have today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.